This next review video is going to be on the Enlightenment and how these men's philosophical ideas through the 16th and 18th centuries are really going to have a major impact on the world and the revolutions that we're going to be talking about going forward. So the Enlightenment is actually an intellectual revolution, right? And it's going to also be known as the Age of Reason in comparison to the Age of Faith when we are coming out of the Reformation. And the thing is that the Enlightenment beliefs are going to kind of stem from the scientific revolution that's also going on at the same time, and the world being run, through these natural laws, and the scientific method is going to, also be applied to what they see as these natural laws and applied to reason in the human world and not just the physical and natural world that we were talking about in the scientific revolution. And the hope of these philosophers of the time period really is that human progress is going to be possible through this application of reason and applying the scientific knowledge and the scientific method to matters such as government and law and society. So the first Enlightenment thinker that we are going to be talking about is a man named Thomas Hobbes, and he is perhaps most famous for his work known as the Leviathan. And what Thomas Hobbes says in this book is that humans exist in what he calls a primitive state of nature, or other words, a constant state of war, and that life in this state of nature for people is nasty, brutish, and short, and that men are evil because they are always essentially going to act in their own self-interests, and that in order to protect in order for people to protect themselves from other people, that humans then ultimately must consent to some sort of government or a strong person for that self-protection, and that people are going to give up some of their rights to this strong leader or a government, in exchange for law and order and protection from that constant state of nature and other people acting in their self-interests. Next, we have a man named John Locke, and John Locke's biggest influence is going to be his book called The Two Treatises on Government, and really his ideas are going to be hugely important for the American Revolution going forward, but also just in general what's going on in Europe as well. And what John Locke says is that kings are ultimately not chosen by God, and that people are sovereign, that the people are the ones who actually consent to the government for the protection of what he dubs as natural rights. And these natural rights he describes are life, liberty, and property, and that if a government does not actively protect these rights of the people, then it's the people's right to actually get rid of that government. Our next Enlightenment thinker is a man named Montesquieu, and he is going to be most famous for his work called On the Spirit of Laws. And what Montesquieu lays out in this piece is that the best form of government is going to actively include what he dubs as a separation of powers into multiple branches. In this case, a legislative, executive, and a judicial branch. And the whole point is that through this series of checks and balances, that each branch would be able to check the others, and that no one branch would get to be too powerful and tyrannical. Our next Enlightenment thinker is a man named Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he is going to be the most famous for his work that's known as the social contract. And his ideas expressed in this book are effectively that the government is actually a contract between the people and the rulers, and that government is based on the consent of the governed, very similar to John Locke there, and that people, are the ones, in the general will of the people is what decides what is the moral and ethical aspects of a society, and that in some cases people, do also need to give up some rights for the general will of the public and the common good. He discusses majority rule too, as well, and typically it's going to be the majority's opinions that are going to shape this social contract. The last man you are going to need to know is Voltaire, and he is perhaps the most famous for his ideas that religious toleration should ultimately triumph over religious fanaticism, and that's really important because everyone's belief, he's basically saying, should be accepted, and that the government should actually be separate from the church, and that you should have this separation of church and state and government to have the best type of system that you can. So as I was kind of saying earlier in this video, that these Enlightenment philosophers and their train of thought and their thinking on political issues is greatly going to shape some of the revolutions of the 18th century and 19th century. And the United States is going to kind of be the first big one here. You're going to have John Locke in particular fueling Thomas Jefferson when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and then you have the people who wrote the Constitution effectively drawing from the ideas of Montesquieu and his separation of powers. You're going to have France kind of drawing from a lot of the lessons of the American Revolution and these Enlightenment thinkers as well when they go down the road of revolution themselves. And just to reiterate that last time, right, so Thomas Jefferson really draws from John Locke for his Declaration of Independence. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights are going to draw from Montesquieu, but also Voltaire and his whole idea of religious tolerance and the separation of church and state. So that is it for our quick recap of the Enlightenment thinkers. So until next time.